So, Mikhail, thanks for joining me here. And this is a quick discussion between Mikhail and I, really to introduce some of the background to the new fund that we're launching. And it's just fantastic to have you join Amati with Graham to launch this new fund, which is the title of which is going to be the TB Amati Strategic Innovation Fund, and it's a global equity fund. And so we want to talk through quite a lot about innovation, what it means to you, why we're calling the funds Strategic Innovation Fund, what those terms are trying to indicate. And so maybe a good place to start is, why don't we just maybe rewind back to when we first met, when we worked together for 5 years on running the UK Smaller Companies Fund, which I'm still running now. You'd obviously left and went to Standard Life and then Aviva, running global equity funds. But looking back on that period, what did you learn from running investing in small companies back then that you then took with you to managing global equities later on?
There's a few things. I mean, the most interesting smaller companies are companies that will become bigger because they're doing something really, really good with a long runway for growth. And often it's a very innovative approach to a service, a new product. So innovation is was pretty central to my experience of small cap management in 2002, I think, is when I started here. And it's interesting looking back at some of the companies that were small caps then. Some of them made it and became spectacularly successful. I mean, if I think about Arm Holdings, which was a relatively specialist small cap at the time, just about getting to the top of our investment range. There's been a spectacular success. Imagination Technologies, a bit less so. If I look at some of the even niche, more specialist companies, they kind of flamed out. They did some interesting things, but it didn't work out. So it was an interesting combination of you're at the forefront of something. You understand what's changing in that industry really well as a business. We as investors are privy to that understanding. But whether or not you are the right global winner from that change, from that innovation, is an open question. So, I mean, frankly, I guess statutory limitations have expired on that. One of the reasons I wanted to go into global equities, I always felt a degree of frustration, if I can say that you need to learn how this thing works globally to understand this UK business. But then you don't get to pick the global winner if it's not listed in the UK. So I wanted that broader opportunity set. I got it. I lost access to some of the small cap insight. So coming back is a degree of, well, now I have the best of both worlds. I still have the access to the innovation frontier through the eyes of innovative company in the UK, but I get to pick a global winner from whatever I've learned from that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And of course, from our point of view too, we've got the mirror image of that. And it's one of the reasons why I particularly wanted you to come and run the fund here, is that we get the reverse information. So it's really, it's very, very useful for us to think about how our companies play out in a global field and to understand how the global industries are developing. So the insights you bring back to us are also going to be fascinating for us. So yeah, thank you for that. And innovation, I mean, some people I know are going to feel this is an overused term, and it has been used a lot in the last 10, 20 years, I guess because the world has just been changing so unbelievably quickly. And companies have gone around appointing chief innovation officers in some cases and that kind of thing. Some companies have tried to make a whole business models out of this word. But for you've developed an innovation test when you were looking as a fund manager at companies. Tell us a bit about that, and what does it involve, and why have you constructed it the way you have?
So simplistically, what we want to look for is, what is the value of that innovation? How does it make a difference? You can invent all sorts of things, but they will be commercially successful, and therefore they will create value for investors if they are practically useful. And that often entails access to functionality that previously wasn't available. Now you can do this thing because of this new invention. Improving the functionality of something that's already doable, it can be done better, or improving the economics. make something cheaper, make something more profitable through this innovation. So that's the first part of that test, if you like, the first question of that test. The second question is, dare I say, is it real? What is is there evidence of traction? Is there evidence of adoption of this innovation? I keep coming back to this quote from a science fiction writer, which I quite like. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. That's the kind of innovation we like. We are less, we might be compelled by a kind of a vision of the world in 10 to 20 years time. It's just my willingness to believe that I'm better than the average market participant, or even right in making this calls, will be less. Whereas if you spot something that is happening, just haven't been broadly distributed yet, but has this runway to proliferate, that's really exciting. And that tends to be a bit more practical, a bit more real. And then the third thing is, what's the size of that runway? What's the size of the market this innovation is accessing? And what is the, what's the market growth like? So that there's a way to quantify the opportunity. And the other thing probably worth mentioning is we're very interested in understanding how this company interact with that innovation. What gives rights, what gives license to this company to benefit from this innovation?
Yeah, and when you and I have been talking through this and pushing at these ideas, you came up with this brilliant phrase the other day of companies having a license to innovate, which I really like that concept, where it's not simply about some technology, it's not simply about one idea. It's actually a kind of ecosystem that involves having the right financing, involves having the right culture in the company, having the management team who create those expectations. So it's actually it's conveying the idea that this is really about the whole that you're investing in, not just a little bit of technology here. This technology on its own doesn't necessarily create innovation that gets adopted. It might be fantastic and well-beating, but it may go nowhere. It requires this amazing thing, which we call a company, to be functioning well in all its departments to really bring it off. And does that sort of resonate with your experience in global equities over the last few years?
Yes, and sometimes, as you say, the license to innovate has nothing to do with who invented the technology to begin with. And we toyed with using this license to innovate idea as a strapline. We decided it's a bit confusing, because does that mean that license means something? Is it have you licensed a patent, or that sort of thing? So we talk about the track record and credibility in relation to this innovation. But what we mean by that is, sometimes the license to innovate is, you've been at it for 10 years and finally this technology is going mainstream, or it's acquiring new incremental, examples from the work that we're doing now, have been doing in the past couple of months, is, some optical technologies, some laser technologies have been in optical communications for decades. And then suddenly you can use the same expertise, the same reputation for reliability and quality by enabling 3D sensing, by enabling material processing. You already secured technological leadership. You are the inventor of this thing, just you have more and more places to sell this into. That's a very credible license to innovate. Almost the opposite end of this, you might be a fantastic place to adopt innovation. Again, an example that in the portfolio today is we have a company that is a global leader in emergency communications for first responders, for police officers, for ambulance crews, for firefighters. And as this public service digitizes, adopts more software, adopts more video tools, adopts more artificial intelligence in some places, what you need for that is the installed base, the trust, the relationships with this very conservative buyers of technologies, police departments, fire departments. And if you've been enabling the technological backbone for their radios for the past decades, you're a logical place to go to get all these new bells and whistles. And you might not have invented that. You might have bought a small company that had that new technology, but they would have gone nowhere on their own. I mean, one of them actually was a UK smaller company that I remember, you and I looked at the time, and it went not very far until it was bought by this American company and gained access to this amazing installed base. So that's another way of thinking about licensing. License to innovate. You didn't invent it, but you were the best place to deploy it.
Yeah, and you've devised a sort of framework around pioneers, enablers, and adopters, which I really like, because that's kind of making clear that your intention with the fund is not simply to invest only at the bleeding edge of pioneers, but also through the relative stages of maturity, the enablers and adopters that they bring. So to have diversification in the portfolio. In terms of, I mean, at Amati, we've tried to design the funds in such a way that the fund managers can help manage the risks that all funds face from different investment climates, different investment cycles. Now, how do you see your ability to invest in that different range of types of maturity of company as enabling you to negotiate, the kind of market crisis we're in at the moment, ones we've seen in the past, but also the huge bull markets we've seen in stocks which are bringing new ideas, and how are you going to negotiate these big ups and downs that come at us?
Well, it's a very bottom-up investment process, but it's also very valuation aware and like quality metrics, profitability metrics aware process, and those will change depending on the market environment we're at. So we're letting our value judgment on these ideas dictate the mix of whether we back the inventors at the bleeding edge, if you like, which are still far away from becoming fully mature companies, but there's some roadmap to that, or the picks and shovels suppliers, the companies that enable those innovators to do what they do, what we call enablers, or the companies that deploy that innovation in their existing businesses and become a more valuable business in the process, the adopters. And yes, they have very different and distinct risk profiles. There are some evergreen reasons to sidestep a pioneer risk. For example, in biotech, pioneer risk is endemic in that it's often a single product risk. And in those cases, unless you have a real angle on science, it is more likely that as a global investor, as a global all cap investor, you'll consider an enabler rather than the pioneer, but not necessarily, but there's a definite bias that way. But there's also a market cycle risk. There are environments, and if we had this conversation 12 to 24 months ago, you'd say, pioneers, every dream gets funded, and the pioneers of exciting technologies are given full benefit of doubt of success, both functional and commercial success of their ideas. So our portfolio would have been biased away from pioneers in a meaningful way at the time. Now, this following the sell-off, and we're recording this in May 2022. So we've seen quite a lot of value emerging in some pioneers as well. So we'll look at that for opportunities to add to the portfolio over the next months and weeks.
Yeah, fantastic. And just maybe finally, I mean, we're really delighted that you've chosen to come to Amati to establish this fund and run it with Graham. What was your thinking in doing that, and what are the ways in which you think Amati can support the growth of this fund?
I think to capture this innovation opportunity, you need to really embrace the complexity and sometimes technical nature of innovation. And Graham and I and Gareth have academic backgrounds and research passion and research interest that is aligned with that, and we're really excited about doing this work. But sometimes that's not enough, and much as we hope that we'll understand these things well, there are always experts and industry specialists that will do it better. What Amati brings from that perspective is this informational advantage, having how we started the conversation, having access to this often smaller, often venture capital trust level companies that are right at the leading edge of these changing industries, having access to the founder entrepreneurs, to the senior executives, to the technical specialists, day in, day out, not just a kind of a purposeful fishing expedition, but just being in the flow of this insights all day, every day is hugely valuable, because sometimes you know what you're looking for, and then this network brings you an opportunity to ask that question. But sometimes this something comes from as a side remark in a conversation, and if you're looking out for it, if you're there, you can say, oh, that's really interesting, let's dig into this a bit more. so that's one thing. And then the other thing is, I mean, Graham and I both worked in very large organizations. We run multi-billion global equity franchises in our time, both teams and funds. And much as we enjoyed that working for large listed companies, we think entrepreneurial, focused, independent boutique really aligned with clients in our incentives. It makes a whole lot of difference in how we live our day-to-day lives as investors. So really excited about that. And it's a very considered judgment on my and Graham's part, and we're really looking forward to building it in Amati.
Fantastic. That's a huge pleasure to have you join us. And as those listeners who know us will know, we try to design and bring to the market funds that we want to invest in. And I know that me and many colleagues in Amati are planning to invest our own savings in your fund, and we wish you every success in managing it.
Thank you. No pressure. I'm going to do the same thing. So we're on the same boat.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mikhail.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.